find a lot of writing advice on the internet, and not all of it is good advice. In this video, I'm going to share 10 pieces of writing advice that I have stumbled across that I personally think are bad pieces of advice. Here are 10 pieces of writing advice that I hate. I'm just going to give you a disclaimer right off the top. If you are a subscriber to my channel or if you've watched a couple of my videos, you will know that I'm a firm believer that there is no one right way to write a book. Every writer is different, and you as the writer have to experiment to figure out what works for you in your own writing process, because different things work for different brains and different types of people. So in this video, I'm speaking from my own personal experience, but I am going to share with you my strong opinions because I firmly believe that all the things that I put on this list are bad pieces of advice and that they should not be listened to. So the first piece of writing advice that I absolutely hate is don't read in your genre, or you will be influenced by it. A lot of people tell you when you're writing a particular genre not to read in that genre because you don't want to be influenced by the other books in the genre. You want to be original, you want to make a splash, you don't want to have any subconscious influences by other books that have already been published. Now, I am in no way condoning plagiarism, but if you are going to write in a particular genre, it's really important for you to understand why that genre is popular and what makes readers gravitate toward that genre. In certain genres, readers expect certain things. In a romance, readers expect there to be a happily ever after. Sometimes they expect a meet cute. They usually expect some sort of conflict right toward the climax of the book and maybe a breakup. Understanding the genre you're writing in is really important to appealing to the readers who already like that genre, and the best way to learn about that genre is by reading heavily in the genre that you're writing in. And reading in your genre can give you great ideas. It's really hard to find a completely original idea that has never ever been done before, and so if you find an element of a book in your genre that you really love as an author, it can be really exciting to find a way to tie something like that into your own story, because chances are readers like you will react to it the way that you reacted to it when you read that other book. The second piece of bad writing advice that I hate is never use adverbs. People love to hate on adverbs. There are tons of people who say never use adverbs in fiction and that there is absolutely no place for an adverb in fiction. And while I think that it is true that in most cases, most adverbs can be replaced by a stronger verb, it's not always the best way to write a sentence. Sometimes there is a place for an adverb if you are trying to get across a piece of information that's not incredibly important to the scene and you don't want to draw attention away from a piece of dialogue. You can just say that character said gently without having to come up with a stronger way to say that. Sometimes that piece of information is just not that important, so it's easier to just slip it in with an adverb and be done with it than try to come up with a stronger way to say it. Especially if that stronger way to say it involves using big thesaurus words that your main character might not choose to say in that moment. Which brings me to my third piece of bad writing advice, which is to use complex words. Have you ever read a piece of writing where it feels like the writer has written that with a thesaurus open right next to them? Where it just feels very purple prosy? Where it feels like everything is described in an unnecessarily complicated way? Using fancier words doesn't make a reader think that your writing is more sophisticated. It usually has the opposite effect of taking them out of your story and making them feel as though they're being spoken down to by a writer who thinks they are oh so intelligent. This is not to say you cannot use complex words. I use complex words in my books. Tons of great writers use complex words in their books. Using complex words is great. This is only referring to writers who use complex words too much and in a way that is glaring and takes the reader out of the story or that does not necessarily fit. If the writing style fits the complex words, then it works. But if you're writing like a YA romance where the character is a 16-year-old and it's supposed to be, and it's told in the first person present point of view, and it's supposed to be relatable, and the character is supposed to be very personable, and they're just using, like, trying to sound like a human dictionary all the time, it's not as much fun to read. The fourth piece of bad writing advice is only write when you're inspired. I've heard people say this a couple of times, that you just want to run with your whims and when you're inspired and write when you are feeling like you want to write. But I have found in my experience that if I just only wrote when I was feeling inspired to write, that it would take me a million years to finish a project. There are plenty of days that I'm writing my books where I could think of a million other things I'd prefer to do other than sit my butt in the chair and write my book. I love to write, it's my favorite thing in the world, but sometimes I literally cannot bear the thought of putting pen to paper, fingers to keyboard, and finishing that chapter. Because it's hard, it requires focus, I'm not in the mood sometimes. But I find that when I'm very disciplined with myself and force myself to sit that butt in that chair and write on the days that I'm not inspired or not feeling like it, oftentimes the inspiration comes once I'm already getting moving or getting in the groove, and I don't lose inspiration by taking some time off from the project. When I'm on a consistent writing schedule, even if there are days that I'm not feeling inspired, I am more likely to keep my state of inspiration going on a day-to-day basis if I push through the days that I am not feeling it. Consistency creates inspiration for me, so it's really important that I stick to my schedule if I want to get my book done in a timely manner. I also think that it's possible to manufacture inspiration. If you're not feeling a particular scene, maybe there's a reason that you're not feeling that particular scene and you have to go back to the drawing board and figure out why you don't want to write it. Or if I'm just tired one day, I can have a cup of coffee and listen to a song that gets me thinking about my characters, and then all of a sudden I'm in the mood to write and I want to write that scene. It's not always possible, but there are some things that help me push through and get that scene written even on days that I don't want it to be written. And I get so much satisfaction out of having written that scene, even though I wasn't inspired at the beginning of the session. I'm usually inspired at the end of the session because I'm satisfied about having written that, and I'm proud of myself that I was able to write it anyway, and then I'm all jazzed to keep going the next day. My fifth piece of bad writing advice is listen to all of the feedback you get. Getting feedback on your writing is extremely important. Listening to feedback on your writing and incorporating that feedback is also extremely important. But you don't have to listen to every single piece of feedback that you get. Because art is subjective, and people are going to have different opinions reading your book because people have different tastes in what they like. Writing craft exists, and some writers have a very good grasp of the craft, and some writers have a worse grasp of the craft. And all writers are constantly trying to improve their craft and get better at telling stories because that's what we want to do, and that's what we love to do, and we want to be able to do it effectively. But even though there are some books that are objectively good, there are still people that will not like that book because their taste in books does not align with what that book is trying to do. They might have the best writing craft in the world, but that person has taste that just doesn't vibe with the author and doesn't get the book and doesn't like it for whatever reason, even though the craft is there and the book is good. So sometimes when people give you feedback on your book, some comments may come from a place of this could be improved from a writing craft perspective. You could work on your dialogue, you could work on your dialogue tags, you could work on the structure, and other things are going to come from a place of their own personal tastes and biases and opinions. Because everybody has such different tastes, it's completely impossible to write a book that everybody on the planet is going to like. It's just impossible. No one has ever done it. Go to the Goodreads page of your favorite book in the entire world. I guarantee you there are bad reviews there of people that just did not like it and did not get it. So if you get feedback on your work from a wide variety of people, you can get people that give you completely conflicting pieces of advice. You can have someone that says they love the romance. You can have someone who says the romance is corny if they don't really like romances like that. You can have someone who finds the pace really slow because they love really fast-paced thrillers. You can have another person that finds the pace way too fast and it's just confusing and there's too much going on because they prefer things that are slower paced. So it's our job as the writer to take all of that feedback and separate what we want to listen to from what we don't want to listen to. Because if we try to please everybody, we are not going to be able to get anything done. We are going to dilute the essence of our project. The way I like to decide what feedback to listen to and which to ignore is if I hear the same piece of feedback from multiple people. When I get beta readers to read my books, I always get multiple beta readers to read it and then pay attention to the things that I hear from more than one person. If it's just one person's opinion, then maybe I'll incorporate it if I also agree with them and I feel like it's something that will improve the book and aligns with my own artistic vision for the book. But if it's a person's opinion that I don't necessarily agree with, I listen to my internal compass on that one. But I always take feedback very seriously when multiple people give it to me. The next piece of bad writing advice is only focus on plot. Or when outlining your books, to only write out and outline the plot instead of the other elements that go into your book. If you are a plotter, outlining plot is definitely important, but it's not the only important thing to plan when writing out an outline for your book. There are so many more elements that go into a book than just the plot. For example, I also like to outline the character arcs of my major characters in my story. I also like to outline all of the relationship arcs for the major relationships in the book to make sure that each of them change from the beginning to end. And I like to think about the theme and try to figure out what theme that this book could be discussing and how it could be poking and prodding at this theme over the course of the scenes. I like to use a plot grid when I outline my books, and I do have a column for the main plot of the story, but I also have columns for the character arcs, for the subplots, for the theme, and for the relationship arcs. I'm a very character-driven writer, so I believe that the character arcs are just as important as the plot arcs when you are plotting the story if you are a plotter. So I think it's a mistake to only focus on plot if you have chosen to outline your story. Which segues nicely into my next piece of bad advice, which is to always outline your story. While I do believe that every single writer should have a vague idea about the general structure of their book before they start writing, unless you're Stephen King and have an intrinsic understanding of story structure and can naturally put scenes where they need to be in order to create a narrative flow, it's very important to have a general idea as to where your story is going. If you are a pantser and you hate plotting with a passion, you don't need to outline every single scene, but I do think it's important to have at least a little bit of an understanding of where you're going. But I disagree with the people that say every single person has to outline their story no matter what. Some people just really hate outlining. For some people, outlining in detail kills the joy of writing because they find joy in the discovery part of the process. I get very stressed out by the discovery part of the process. I like to have a bit of a balance because I do find it interesting when I'm able to discover a new way of getting from point A to point B, but I like knowing what point B is, so at least I have a direction, because otherwise I can get really stressed out because there are too many things to keep track of. But for some people, if they knew what point B was, there would not be a point in writing the story, and they would lose motivation, and they would lose interest, and the whole thing would just fall apart. There is no one process that works for every writer, and so people who say always outline or never outline are never right. If you take anything from this video, it is to question advice given by somebody who uses always or never, because things are usually not always or never true. That might be the personal truth of that author, and they might really believe that, but that might not be the personal truth for you, and so you need to figure out what you believe and what works best for your process. The 8th piece of bad writing advice is to prioritize quantity over quality of work. I used to be that writer who prioritized how many words that I can write over the quality of the words that I wrote. If I wrote 5,000 words in a day, I would be over the moon even if all of those words were unusable and I really hated what I had written. While it is good to get words on the page, especially when you're writing your first draft, and those words don't have to be good, you shouldn't completely disregard the quality of your words in order to try and write more of them. At least for me, in my experience, when I have prioritized quantity and I have written tons of words and I have a draft that is coming along very quickly, if the quality is not there and if I don't feel like I'm writing what I should be writing, or I'm not writing something that contributes to the story, or I'm not writing something that brings the story to life as I see it in my head, I start to lose motivation for it, and my momentum dies when I'm maybe about halfway or 3/4 of the way through the book. I just can't keep going if I feel like my entire foundation and everything I've written before is completely messy. This is something I've learned about myself recently. I am never able to finish my first drafts. I have never typed the end on a first draft before. I have only ever gotten maybe halfway through or 3/4 of the way through before I've had to start over, go back to the beginning, edit, and turn what I had written of my draft 1 into a second draft, and then go ahead and write the ending after that. But that's because I try to prioritize quality and make sure that the words that I'm putting down on the page are words that are not necessarily polished, not necessarily good, but do advance the story and are accomplishing something that I am proud of. This is why I am more of a slower writer and I have a slower publishing schedule, because I really need to take the time to come up with my ideas for books and to flesh things out instead of racing through them, because whenever I've tried to race through them, my product has not been as good and I have been so stressed out of my mind that it has just not been a productive process for anybody. I'm very jealous of the writers who can write and publish books that they are proud of really quickly, but if I were to speed up my process, the books that I would be publishing would not be books that I would be proud of. So I prefer to take my time both with drafting and with publishing to make sure that what I'm writing is something that I am happy with and something that advances my story or my book drafting process in some way. I won't just sit down and write a scene that I know isn't going to end up in the book just to get some words done for the day. The next piece of advice will not come as a surprise to you if you are a subscriber to this channel, and that is said is dead. Said is very much alive and well, and said is the best dialogue tag to use when you're writing dialogue if you want your dialogue tag to fade into the background. Not every single dialogue tag needs to announce that it's a dialogue tag. You want your dialogue to speak for itself. If your character is really angry, you want that to come through in what they're saying instead of in your overly complicated dialogue tag. I made an entire video on dialogue tags that I will link in the description of this video. I recommend watching it if you are interested in learning more about dialogue tags, but using too many dialogue tags that aren't said just bogs down your reader and just makes your writing gunked up and messy looking. It also makes you look like you're trying too hard. You don't want to look like you're trying too hard. You want your writing to seem really natural. And finally, the last piece of bad writing advice that I will share is let the characters write themselves. Now this one I feel like is bad advice because it's just not something I've ever resonated with, and this has just not been my experience with writing characters. But if it has been your experience, I'm very jealous of you. My characters have never written themselves in my novels. I have never understood people who say that they're writing a scene and they have an idea for where it should go, or they're writing a book and they have an idea of where it should go, and then their characters just take the reins and take the book in a completely different direction. That has never been my experience while I've been writing. And while my characters feel very real to me, the only reason that they feel that real is because of all of the work that I've done fleshing them out and building them. I have found a lot of success in sitting with my characters and fleshing them out and trying to get to know them and figure out who they are as people, instead of just feeling it out and seeing who they become on the page. It is very important to write your first draft to learn who your characters are, but I do also like keeping track of all of the different facets of their personalities, writing out a thorough backstory for them, and generally taking a more active role in their construction instead of allowing them to just happen all by themselves. Because all the times that I've tried to do that, my characters have not come across as authentic or as three-dimensional, or they might have contradicted themselves throughout my draft. My process for creating characters combines elements of writing your first draft and seeing who they become, and doing the more active character creation work. And I think those two things need to go hand in hand for you to be able to write characters that come across as very authentic. So that's it for my video on 10 pieces of writing advice that I don't like. I hope that you liked it, or at least found it entertaining. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, this is all purely my opinion, and these are just things that don't work for me or I don't like, that don't fit with my process. I mean, some of them are kind of objective fact, but some of them are also just opinions, so if you disagree with me, let me know in the comments. If you agree with me, let me know in the comments. I would love to hear your opinions on these things. If you had a second, I'd really appreciate it if you could give this video a like and also subscribe to my channel. My name is Claire Fraze, and I'm an award-winning author who makes videos on this channel about actionable writing tips that help me make my own writing better. I'm the author of the paranormal thriller They Stay series, which is a 5-book series about a girl whose younger brother goes missing in their small town, and the only clue to what could have happened to him is held by a ghost in their town cemetery, and so it's a paranormal mystery, kind of creepy adventure. So if you like those kinds of books, go check them out, and if you are a writer, go out check out the other videos on my channel. Thank you so much for watching this one. I hope you have a fantastic week, and as always, happy writing.